Well, hello, hello, ambitious women who are realigning with their soul to expand from the soulful place. And today we continue our series, Discover Your Magic by using metaphysical tools. And today I have my co-magician, Nicki. So we'll be talking about something very interesting, which is not, I think, very popular, but it exists, and that is palm reading. We do
Yes,
have right and we do have left. So Nicki
yes.
is gonna take us on a journey of palmistry, and we'll learn so much more today. Hello, Nicki. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing fantastic. And you?
Amazing.
I love it. So the the history of palmistry or chiromancy actually goes way back to the Egyptian times. People have been reading their palms to understand their personality and their fate for literally thousands of years. So it's a very old practice. There is the art of actually reading the palm. There is the art of reading the fingers and then the actual prints on your fingers. So as a palmistry expert, you are really giving people insight into all of those dimensions. If you are, educated in them, some people will just simply look at the lines. I look at all of the different components of the hand, but what I love to do with a palmistry assessment is typically to give people an understanding of their personality type, their purpose, where challenges have popped up, where they might pop up, what their trials and tribulations within their love life might look like. It's very interesting because I always want to use this tool as a tool of empowerment. So when it comes to palmistry, it isn't always the most commonly used tool of my metaphysical tools because there's a lot of, I would say, fate on our hands. So instead, what I like to do is have a conversation with them about when I look at their hand, I can see the line that is the most red or raw or tasseled, which means that it has a bunch of little lines coming off of it. I can kind of see what area of their life is the area most in need of a little TLC and in-depth analysis. So I'll just tell you a quick story. I was meeting with a client at the Mind Body Spirit Festival I think a year ago. And she didn't know what she really wanted to talk about. So when people don't know what they want to talk about, when they sit down with me, I always say, let me look at your hands. And if I can look at their hands, I can know where we need to start. So I looked at her hands, and your relationship lines are right on the side of your palm underneath your pinky. And she had a relationship line that was really red, was almost, it looked raw, dry. There was just a lot of components to the relationship line that did not look good. So I asked her, do you mind if we really delve into the relationship component and, draw some tarot cards on that, go a little bit more in depth in your heart line and all that stuff. And she kind of like breaks down and she tells me that her husband just passed away a couple months ago. And I just had this like aha moment. And when I looked, so you can look at the relationship line and it's at the side of your palm, but your heart line and your overall emotional life is right at the top of your palm. So this emotional life, it starts underneath your pinky and it goes up towards your pointer finger. And when I look at that emotional life, I can see exactly the periods of time when she will be challenged and how does she navigate that and what type of skills does she lean into. So when we're looking at a relationship line here, I can see if she is somebody who's going to draw strength from herself, if she's going to draw strength from her community, if she's going to draw strength from having kind of a routine and a structure. So it's fascinating with hands because in seeking to empower people, I always want to look for where's the owie and how can I help them, basically. So, with my own hand, the most tasseling that I have was on my relationship hand, or was on my relationship line, rather. So I had a lot of little lines coming from my relationship line here. And essentially, what that was telling me with all those little lines coming from the relationship is that I was constantly kind of putting myself out there to relationships. I was constantly giving of myself, and I didn't necessarily have good boundaries. And for me, emotionally, because I have so many lines coming off of that relationship line, I had high emotional sensitivity, inability to create great boundaries, but yet all of my strength comes from myself, not necessarily others. So when I look at my relationship line, it goes up towards this pointer finger. This is the self. So interestingly enough, for me, with my pointer finger really getting all of the energy from my emotional self, I needed to be able to take care of myself. I need a ton of introverted time. I need a ton of reflection, introspection to fuel my cup so I can actually be in relationship to others. And I need to have better boundaries. So this is just one example of, me, the relationship line had some challenges. This lady, her actual marriage line had a challenge on her hand. So the first thing to do when you're looking at your own palm is to look at your lines and to look at which ones look kind of reddish, which ones have a little bit of tasseling, which ones look the weakest. So I'm going to let you guys know about the major lines so you can really kind of feel into where you need the most help. So I talked about this top line right here. So we all have this line at the top of our palm, and it is our emotional line, which I just talked about. And it starts underneath the pinky and it goes up typically towards the middle finger or the pointer finger. That's your emotional line. Your intellectual line or your head line, this line goes right across your palm. So your head line will be starting right underneath the pointer finger, and then we'll be going across your palm. It might be going across your palm really straight. It might be going across your palm at a deep angle. They mean two different things, but this is your intellectual line, your head, your analytical capabilities. Then we have the most typical line people know, it's just the lifeline. And the lifeline can sometimes connect with a headline right underneath that pointer finger. And that lifeline is going to dart out to the middle of your palm and then usually swoop back in and go underneath your thumb line. So we get a little darting out and then a swooping back in, and that's your lifeline. Then, not everybody has this, but I have this. There's a fate line that will run down the middle of your palm. That fate line is kind of an interesting line. That fate line is really connected to our work, where we find purpose, and how we get things done in life, and how much of our fate is kind of left up to us, and how much of our fate is a little bit more left up to the universe. So those are the main four lines I wanted to talk about. I did want to talk about that middle line just a little bit more in depth because not everybody has that. I do have that fate line, or that middle one. Do you have that, Jules?
On both hands.
Oh, perfect.
From
Perfect.
what
All
I
right.
see, I feel like that's the middle
Yes.
line.
Yes, you do.
Goes
You
like
did.
that.
I
Except
believe.
mine is not very like straight. It just
Yeah.
the
Yours is a little bit more jagged. Yep.
yeah, like with lots of branches kind of going all over
Yes.
the place. Is it because I'm all over the place?
Yeah. So with that fate line there,
Mhm.
uh, I can describe this well in comparing my husband and I. So my husband doesn't have a fate line at all. And he travels through the world very open-minded, very much led by, I would say, universal forces, and he's very creative and not very like structured, methodical, and there's a good level of discipline, but it doesn't necessarily come from routine and methods. It comes from creativity and using the universal energy to create what he wants. Now, for myself, with anybody with a really straight line, these are your project managers, your orderly people. Mine is extremely straight. My career started out pretty much, I have a business degree. I went up the ladder. I had a pretty continuous trajectory of my life overall. It was pretty methodical in what I was choosing for a career and how I was going forward with it. So mine is very linear and there's that distinct line. Now, Jules, yours is kind of like you try this, you try that, you try the other thing. If we were to look in your hand very in depth, we can kind of see when you started this career, when you started that career, when you started this, you kind of have this like skis, I would say, on your hand where you have a series of things that you've tried. They do require routine and discipline, but there's not necessarily a cohesion to everything that you do, but there is a building up of skill sets overall. So it's really fascinating when I look at people's hands, if they have that really straight line like me, I know that anything, well, most things that they accomplish, especially in their career, are going to be very methodical. These are your accountants, these are your lawyers, these are your people who live and abide by structure, and they're not going to diverge too much from their career path. If I have somebody with no fate line, I'm usually working with a very creative person who does not want to be at the whims of any sort of structure, rules, regulations. So if you don't have a fate line, that's totally fine. That means the world is very open to you. If you do have a fate line, that means really rely on your own ability to be very self-regulated and self-disciplined to get what you want in life. So I love looking at that fate line because for me, it helps me understand how to coach people and for people to understand how they most effectively can work in their career. So I've explained the emotion line just a little bit, the fate line. I did want to talk about the lifeline because I would say a lot of people come to me and they don't necessarily want a palm reading because they don't want anybody to tell them, their life is ending soon or that they have major health problems. And I 100% am in agreement that that is not what I want to share in a palmistry reading. Rather, when I look at the lifeline, I am looking for general life vitality. I want to see a very nice, smooth lifeline with a continuous energy going through it. I want to see a nice level of depth comparable to the other lines. I will Jules, on your lifeline, you had some nice upward movement on your lifeline. I could see a lot of achievements. I could see a lot of energy overall on your lifeline. Interesting on your lifeline, I can also see in the middle of your lifeline, you have some X's that are connecting you to your fate line, right in the middle of your lifeline. So it's almost like your life, your vitality, everything that kind of keeps your chi going right in about your mid 30s to early 40s. Your career was sapping all of that because I have all those X's between your career and that straight fate line and your lifeline. And then after that, you have a little bit easier going. But it's interesting when I look at the lifeline, I can actually see when people were getting the life sucked out of them and what was kind of sucking the life out of them and when they get their life force and their vitality back. I do sometimes see people who will have a heart issue, an illness that is typically blood related on that lifeline too will appear, different types of things will appear. And, if the lifeline is shorter, this is kind of the rationale behind a shorter lifeline is, and I don't know if this is particularly true, but this is what I've been taught. Shorter lifeline just means that you are a little newer soul to this world. You have you have a lot of lifetimes ahead of you to mature and to really grow into this earthly experience. The longer the lifeline, the older the soul, the more you're going to see. If you have somebody with a long lifeline, usually they were a very mature child. They kind of came into this world as an older soul, as somebody who like kind of understood the game of life and knew how to like emotionally kind of handle themselves earlier in life. And the shorter lifeline is sometimes indicative of a little hotter temper, a little bit less ability to control emotions, and a little younger soul there. So, but with the lifeline overall, I am looking at honestly life happiness and vitality. And if that line is talking to me and basically telling me like it's lighter than the other lines, it is really tethered compared to the other lines, we need to talk about their energetic management, their nutrition, their lifestyle, their overall life happiness. I think, it's it really is a holistic way of looking at the palm. When we look at the lifeline and we look at the others, I can see, where we really need to focus. Is it the emotions, or is it the health, nutrition, working out, all that stuff? But yeah, that lifeline is really, really cool to see. And just looking at yours, Jules,
Mhm.
the biggest thing that I saw on yours, which was interesting, and I want to call out for other people too, is that this headline that we have, this
Mhm.
headline right here, and how attached it is to the lifeline is kind of how attached we are to our family of origin. Now, you have a little bit of gap
Mhm.
between your intellectual headline and your lifeline. And
Mhm.
you can see that there's a gap between you and your family of origin, but then I see these X's coming back to kind of grab you back in. And we've talked a little bit about your relationship with your mom and different things. Like, it's interesting. There's like this in your life, there's this total letting go and total kind of like space between you and your family of origin, and then a coming back togetherness. And how you handle that is totally indicative of your energetic level. You have the most intertwinement on your lifeline, I would say, compared to the other lines on your hands. You're so intertwined with that, like it back and forth with the family of origin, that you really have to control your energy around that. One other thing, and I just want to make sure I'm staying on time here, but any questions before I go into the one of the last lines here?
Well, I think maybe you can mention like right and left. What's the difference? Because
Oh
looking at
yeah.
my lifeline, I can see on my left, my lifeline just goes and it goes
Yeah.
way beyond my palm. But on my right one, I see there is a little bit of split off
Oh, gotcha.
at the bottom. It still goes all the way, off my palm, but
Yeah.
it's a split off. So I don't know, like right, left, if you tell us
Yeah.
differences.
Absolutely. So your right hand, or whatever your dominant hand is, this dominant hand, you are controlling the energetic flow to. You are kind of manipulating the script that you came into this world with your own will and determination. When we looked at your left hand, these are the raw ingredients that you come into this life with. So I like to call this is the recipe box. This is the recipe box for who you are, what you're meant to do, and the raw ingredients of the recipe. So when I look at somebody's left or non-dominant hand, I can see kind of what the vision was for what they were meant to fulfill in this lifetime, the type of relationships, the type of intellectualism, the type of life vitality, all of that good stuff. Then when I look at their right hand or their dominant hand, that is where I see their will, their habits, and their propensities coming into play. So if I see somebody who has a really clean lifeline on their left palm, I see compared to the right, it's almost like life wants to be easier. Life wants to be more in flow and not throw up as many obstacles. And it's actually sometimes your willful self-determination that is creating a little bit of angst, a little bit of challenge in your chi. It is showing me the propensity that you most likely need to practice more patience with what energy is coming to you and what you're allowing in. So when I see that nice left hand lifeline and it looks stronger than the right, it asks me almost, how can you let go? How can you allow the flow of energy? How can you take your hands off the wheel a little bit? So that's kind of the difference in how we're looking at the hands here. What I'll see too is, for me, on my right hand, my intellectual line, which is what I wanted to talk about, one of the last lines here, the intellectual line goes across the hand. Mine really dips down into what we call this mount of the moon, or the emotional side. Mine dips down. Now, on the left hand, my intellectual line wants to dip down, but then it kind of starts to go straight. I will say, when you have an intellectual line that dips down on your hand, that is your propensity to be creative, to be sensitive, to be artistic, and to be a little bit more in the liberal arts. When it is straight across the hand, you are very practical, pragmatic, mathematic and logic focused. These are our engineers. These are typically our accountants and typically people in medicine, but medicine can kind of go a couple different ways in your hand. But when I look at yours, Jules, your headline is very downward sloping on your right hand. So on your right hand compared to your left, it's a little bit hard to see. You have a major fork on your left. It's almost like the raw ingredients of your world were to be very, very balanced between the logical and the creative and feeling side. But when we go to what you're actually cultivating, it's much more of the creative side, the sensitive side, and the artistic side. But when I look at the raw ingredients you came into this life with, you have this fork where it shows you really have that balance between the logic and the creativity. I will say, when this line dips way down, sometimes I can see people being extremely sensitive to the point of sometimes struggling emotionally with other people around them, or kind of getting into a depressive state a little bit more easily. So I do tread lightly when I see a hand that dips so low down into this, what we call the mount of the moon here, because when that happens, you will see some people who have difficult challenges with managing their emotions because they're almost too stuck in the emotional world. So I want to summarize that headline with: the straighter it is, the more you are in the intellect and the logic, and the more that it curves, the more you are in your creative, artistic, emotional quotient. So it's kind of like the IQ versus the EQ almost, but I don't want to make it that simple, but that's a little bit of what it is. So from a palm reading standpoint, it's really interesting to help people with careers as I look at that intellectual line.
Well, my intellectual, yes, there is a fork on the left.
Yes.
And it was more just going straight, yes, not going down. But on my right one, what I see is interesting. At the middle of that intellectual line, there is like almost like this wavy line comes out and it goes down.
Yes, yes. So it's almost like there's a compulsion for you to get more in the emotions, more in the creative space than there is to stay in the logic, which makes sense for, what you're pursuing and stuff too. It's cool to see because you really did come into this world with the raw ingredients of both. But yeah, I'm looking at that. Your fate line is almost pulling your intellectual line down to that creative, that feeling, and that sensing intellect that you have. But it's not too far into the mount of the moon that I would say, there's an overabundance of challenging emotions. It's really quite balanced there, but you are on a journey towards a very creative path rather than the logic that you were in before.
Yeah, interesting. Yes, that's definitely the truth.
And
Mhm.
it's kind of neat too, when we look at the hands, we can see the shape of the hands. And the shape of the hands indicates that person's personality. So when I look at Jules's hand, she has a very long palm, and that is similar to myself with the long oblong palm. And what that indicates is the air element or the head and intellectual element. So when I look at her personality, and this coalesces with her astrology chart, she's very much in the intellectual realm, in the reading, the writing, the speaking, and always in the thoughts. Now, her fingers are kind of interesting compared to her palms. Her fingers are a little bit shorter than her palm. So when the fingers are a little bit shorter, that's an earth element. There's a strong want and need to be in the body, be with the earth, be with the elements. It's almost like we want to, within your hand, we really want to bring together how do we work with the earth? How do we work with the elements, but also weave that intellectually into what you're contributing every day. So your hand overall is kind of fascinating. And I usually have to like touch people's hands too, because I can see if the hand is a little moist, is a little wet to the touch, there's a water element there too. And that means just really high sensitivity to other people. But when I look just at the shape of the hand, it allows me to understand exactly what type of personality and what type of career this person would really excel in. And there's a lot of different things here with your fingers, but I do want to keep us on time here. So when we look at our hands, we can see the shape of our hands, and that is indicative of our personality. But when we actually look at our fingers, we have the self that is represented, and that is our pointer finger. We have our discipline, our structure, and our order, which is our middle finger. Then we have our creativity, which is our ring finger. And then our little pinky here is our ability to communicate effectively. Now, when I look at Jules's hands, it's interesting in that you're very, very well balanced with all of your fingers. The only thing that I really see, which is kind of fascinating, we've talked about before, is this little creativity finger, the ring finger being the creativity finger, is really leaning into the middle finger, which is your structure and your order. And it's almost like your creativity is asking for help with structure and order, which makes sense. Now, if you look at mine, my hand's so crazy here. My structure and order with my middle finger here is actually leaning into my creativity. So my structure and order is almost over asserting itself on my creativity. And you're almost the exact opposite. So it's so interesting to me how the fingers are actually telling a story here about what's taking over in your life and where you really need to. You can't straighten your fingers. You are who you are. But how do you work with that energy? And how do I not let my structure overwhelm my creativity? And how do you let your creativity actually complement your structure and your order? So I wanted to call out those fingers because they're extremely important in addition to the shape of the hand. And then the last thing that I look at, and this requires a little bit more in-depth analysis, but I actually look at people's fingerprints. So I would take ink and I would put their palms down on a piece of paper and I would look at the swirls of their fingerprints and where those swirls actually sit finger by finger. And that would allow me to understand how they are using their unique capabilities of those four different fingers and if they need to use them inwardly, outwardly, if they are more of the individual or the team component within each one of those fingers. These fingerprints can tell us just a ton about what environment suits us the best and how we need to show up in this life to really have our greatest happiness and fulfillment. So I did want to talk about that too. Those are kind of the main things. There's a lot on a hand. I've studied it for years. And the cool thing about studying it and doing palmistry for as long as I have had, you start to see those patterns. You start to see those themes of recognition so you can guide people in a better way. Because there's kind of I would say there's the science and the art of it. And the art is in having done so many and kind of understanding how the hands are working together. And the science is everything I took us through today. There's definitely energy that's pulsating through these palms and it's creating these lines and it's creating on, our non-dominant hand, it's creating what our destiny is and what the map of our persona is, the raw ingredients. And then on the right side of our hand, this is really our will and our determination and what we are actively manifesting. So you will see the lines change the most on the right hand as opposed to the left hand. But there is kind of this co-creation of, what you came to this world with, and then what you are actively creating with the talents that you have.
Yeah,
Question.
that's fascinating. Well, when we brought our hands into the camera, so when I noticed that I have a lot of pink red stuff,
Yes,
I don't know,
yes.
I don't think you talked about the colors, maybe a little bit in the beginning, but I
Yes,
don't
the
know
the
if
color,
it's.
the overall color of the hand, um, if you have consistent pink and red, it's really not that big. It's just the way your hand is. But if let's say your hands are like mine are pretty consistently peach all over. So I don't really find that concerning. Now, when I look at your hands, and I would have to know if you held anything or touched anything, but I do see some redness around your thumb a little bit on both hands. And the thumb is your willpower. And if you have a little redness around your thumb, that would be a little bit of cut off from your own willpower. But when I look at the hands overall, I just want to see consistency of color.
Mhm.
Because usually the color doesn't make that much of a difference unless it's really an inconsistent pattern that I'm seeing on the hands. Where I do see the biggest difference is the lines will usually show color. And if the line is red or it's really different than its other lines, then that's where you want to focus the conversation on. That's where you really want to dig into the details of that part of the person's life.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that you mentioned and I noticed, I think when you were talking about the emotional love
Yeah.
line, so you mentioned that it starts from underneath the index
Yes.
finger, but mine
Um,
seems to be in between.
yeah, so
Oh, well, yeah,
the
I guess
heart
if it
line.
starts from here, but mine goes in between, and I think you
Yeah,
said there.
yeah. So, the heart line right here is underneath the pinky, and it goes upwards towards
Oh,
either
okay.
the pointer. Yeah,
Mhm.
it goes upwards towards the pointer finger or the middle finger.
If it goes in
So
between,
yeah, if it goes in between, then you are what I would call oh gosh, there's a word for it and I can't think of it right now. I want to call it an ambivert, but it's you're really in between an introvert and an extrovert. Like you
Mhm.
are right in the middle. My line goes straight to the pointer finger. So most of my energy is all coming through introversion. Yours is right in the middle. Like you are very much can kind of operate as either introvert or extrovert. If your line was going towards this middle finger, then it's much more of an extroverted hand. It's much more of a person who takes their energy from groups of people, takes their energy from having, the depth of the conversation. And it's, I guess, with yours being in between, you're probably taking a lot of energy from deep one-on-one conversations, some energy from bigger experiences, but you still need your alone time. But when you go and you have that line going straight to the middle finger, those are your classic salespeople, your classic big groups. They usually love team sports, all that good stuff.
Yeah, that's just so fascinating. Yeah, I cannot stop just
Oh, there's
there's
so many things to
definitely, yeah.
analyze. There's so many things to
Mhm.
analyze, and like you sent me your pictures, and that can be helpful. But the intricacies on a hand are really best seen with like a magnifying glass. So usually when I'm doing readings, I'll have a magnifying glass so I can see the specifics of everything. And it's like a system of energy that's
Mhm.
working on your hand and is really trying to, I mean, as a palm reader, it's really trying to tell me where do we need to focus your help on. And that's why I honestly like to use palm readings and tarot in partnership because, your hand is your hand and I can help guide you around it. But then when you need to make decisions for empowerment, when you need to make big choices that are going to start to create your life in a different way, that is when I like to go to tarot. That is like when I like to go to astrology. This just really, really helps me understand the raw ingredients and the map. I love to say your palms are a map of your journey in this life. And
Mhm.
as a palm reader, I can look at the map and see where you are, see where you've been. I can kind of see where you're headed, but by no means is everything predetermined. So you still get to make the choices. You still get to create this divine life you have from your will. But as a map reader, we can say if you drive down Highway 75, you're probably going to land up in, the west side of Florida at some point.
Yeah,
So it's
yeah.
just it's kind of cool. It's a neat tool. It is very helpful to understand yourself, where you're going. And honestly, I do get the most questions. Right underneath that pinky is where our relationships are, our major relationships in life. Doesn't mean you need to be married, but it does mean a long-term relationship that made a huge impact on you. So you can always see underneath that pinky, right above your heart line, that is where we are seeing the major relationships that happen in your life. They start the timing starts right underneath the pinky, and then goes to this heart line. So that's where I will see major relationships. That's where you will see children and things of that nature. It can be a little tricky sometimes when I'm reading for younger people because I can see multiple marriages or multiple, relationships on their hands. So it's not always the first thing that I look at, but it is the thing that people typically ask me the most questions about. And our lives are long, and these lines that we see here are relationship lines, and I have seen it where somebody's married, they stay married to the same person, they have another relationship line, and it ends up being a significant business partnership in their life. So I can't say for certain that they're always going to have, two major relationships. But you can see the people who have had a huge impact on your life and the relative timing. And honestly, the children are pretty easy to see on that line too.
Yes. Well, there is just so much to discover about ourselves so that we can use that to our advantage. So because there is still the power of your will, the power of your choice, the power of what you want to believe. But if we use that as the foundation, just like you said, the recipe, and we will connect with the recipe so that we can start creating more spiciness or other additional whatever we do for the flavor and the spiciness and texture and nutrition and all of that. We can create our own brand or really style of life. So, and the only hope that I have for all of us that we create the style of life that we actually love. And that really starts from loving yourself, which is really getting to know yourself. And you are such a beautiful resource of magical information. And I feel like everybody should be just like connecting with you and making sessions. So, because more we know ourselves, better we are equipped and resourced in life.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you so, so much. I love our journey and learning so much about this metaphysical tools is just amazing. It only confirms that there is nothing black and white, and there are so many things in between if we're open to see and open to
Absolutely.
love all we see.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Nikki. And all the
Thank
links
you.
are going to be in the podcast episode. So please contact Nikki and also join us for the wellness fair that Nikki is creating. And it's also going to be in the podcast notes as well. Have a great day.